A young teacher is unjustly fired by the school principal for intervening to defend a student who was being bullied. But then this happens. Cynthia was a young history teacher with just 1 year of experience, but she was already standing out for her love of the profession and dedication to her students. At 24, she had graduated with honors and quickly started teaching at a school known for its diverse student body. Her passion for education was evident in every class she taught, always looking for creative and engaging ways to spark her students' interest in historical events. For her, the greatest satisfaction came from seeing her students' progress. Although she was new to the profession, her commitment to the well-being of each student was unquestionable. She cared about creating an environment of respect and learning, where every young person felt valued. Cynthia had a close relationship with her students, especially those who faced challenges. Sensitive to their personal stories, she was always willing to listen, offering words of encouragement or a shoulder to lean on. Her classroom was a safe space where students knew they could count on their teacher's unconditional support. That morning, the alarm went off at 6 o'clock, as usual. Cynthia, still a bit sleepy, stretched and forced herself to get up. She knew the day would be long and she needed to be ready to face whatever lay ahead. After a quick shower and a strong cup of coffee, she put on her usual clothes, a pair of dress pants and a simple blouse, and left for school, feeling the fresh morning air as she walked through the streets. Cynthia loved that moment of the day. The walk to school, though short, gave her time to organize her thoughts and plan her lessons. That morning, she had prepared a lesson on the Industrial Revolution, a topic that always sparked good discussions but, as always, required a lot of effort to keep the students engaged. Upon arriving at school, she greeted her colleagues with her usual smile. "Good morning, everyone," she said cheerfully, receiving nods and smiles in return. When she entered the classroom, she began to organize the books and materials on the table. She looked at the board and wrote down the day's topic. But something was bothering her. A feeling, something in the air. She had always had a sixth sense about her students' behavior, especially those who needed more attention. And it was always the case with Nicholas, an extremely shy boy who shrank back whenever he could, avoiding any kind of interaction with his peers. As the students started to enter the room, with that typical noise of chatter and laughter, Cynthia kept her eyes on Nicholas. He walked in slowly, head down, as usual, and headed straight for the back of the room, where he usually sat. But something felt different that day. More than Nicholas's usual silence, there was a tension in the air that Cynthia couldn't ignore. "Good morning, class. Let's settle down, please," Cynthia said, trying to take control of the room. But she noticed that, in the background, a group of students was already starting to gather around Nicholas. "Look who showed up today. I thought he had given up on coming to school after yesterday," Scott, one of the most popular students and undoubtedly the biggest provocateur, sneered. Nicholas lowered his head even further, clenching his fists on the desk but saying nothing. Cynthia watched from her desk, not intervening immediately, hoping this was just a passing joke. But she quickly realized she was wrong. "Hey, Nicholas, why don't you say anything?" "Oh, I forgot, you can't even talk, right?" "It must be because no one wants to hear what you have to say," Abigail said, another student who always joined Scott in his taunts. Laughter began to echo around the room. "I think he must have some sort of problem. He must be kind of dumb, right? He's always quiet, looks like a zombie," Scott added, this time giving Nicholas a light shove on the back that nearly made him fall forward. More laughter. Cynthia felt a knot in her stomach but remained firm, watching a bit longer before acting. She knew she needed to intervene, but she also knew that exposing Nicholas could make him feel even worse. However, Nicholas's silence spoke louder than any words. He was being torn apart inside. "Leave him alone, Scott. I think he doesn't have a brain to respond. We should find another toy, this one doesn't react anymore," Abigail said with a cruel smile, while another student laughed loudly. Nicholas still hadn't said anything, just looking at the floor. It was as if he were trying to disappear. The other students, while not participating directly, watched the scene, some laughing, others just staring in silence, unsure how to react. But no one did anything to stop it. "Look, Nicholas, I'm going to give you a chance to be useful," Scott continued, grabbing Nicholas's backpack and throwing it on the floor. "Pick it up for me. Maybe that way you'll at least be good for something." Nicholas looked at the fallen backpack and didn't move. It was clear that the humiliation was going too far, and Cynthia knew she could no longer wait. "Enough. That's it," Cynthia shouted, her voice cutting through the noise of the classroom like a knife. Everyone stopped and looked at her, surprised by a tone they had never heard before. Cynthia quickly approached the group surrounding Nicholas. "What do you think you're doing?" she said, looking directly at Scott and Abigail. "Does this seem like a joke to you?" Scott forced a smile, still trying to maintain his composure. "We were just joking around, teacher." "Nicholas knows it's just teasing, right, Nicholas?" he said, looking at the boy, who remained motionless. "Teasing? You call this teasing? What I saw here is not funny at all. It's humiliation. You're ridiculing a fellow student, putting him down in a cruel way. Is this what you think is right to do?" Cynthia was visibly furious, and her voice made it clear that this would not be ignored. Abigail tried to laugh. "Oh, teacher, Nicholas knows we're just messing around. He never says anything, so he doesn't even care. He doesn't say anything because you all make sure to silence him with these disgusting actions," Cynthia quickly replied. "And I'm going to make this very clear to you, I will no longer tolerate this kind of behavior in my classroom. This is bullying, it's cruel, and it's disrespectful. And if you think you can keep doing this, you're very mistaken." The students began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Scott, who always considered himself untouchable, finally lowered his head, looking flustered. "We just wanted to have some fun," he mumbled, but his voice no longer carried the confidence it had before. Cynthia looked directly at him. "Fun is when everyone is laughing, Scott. When one person is being humiliated, that's not fun. It's cruelty." She turned to the whole class. "You should be ashamed. Deeply ashamed. What you're doing to Nicholas is unacceptable, and I won't let it go without consequences." She bent down, picked up Nicholas's backpack from the floor, and placed it back on his desk. "Nicholas, you don't deserve this. No one does. You are just as valuable as anyone else in this room." Nicholas, with his eyes downcast, murmured something so quietly that no one could hear. Cynthia then stood up and, with a stern look, turned to Scott and Abigail. "You two, and everyone else who participated in this nonsense, wait for me after class. We're going to have a much longer conversation about what happened here," she said, pointing at the involved students. They didn't dare respond. Silence filled the room. The students who had been laughing just moments before now looked visibly uncomfortable, some staring at their desks, others exchanging uncertain glances. Cynthia knew she had touched on a deep wound, and that her actions there would have repercussions. But for her, the most important thing was to protect Nicholas and show the others that attitudes like those would not go unpunished. She returned to the front of the room, adjusted her materials, and with a sigh, looked at the students. "Now, if everyone understands the lesson, let's start our class." When class ended, Cynthia took a deep breath, watching the students hurriedly get up from their seats. Many seemed eager to leave the room, especially those who had participated in humiliating Nicholas. But as she had promised, Scott, Abigail, and the others involved stayed behind, still reluctant, waiting for what would come next. Cynthia closed the door, crossed her arms, and faced the two with a serious look. "You know how serious what happened today was, right?" she began, not raising her voice but clearly expressing her indignation. Scott, who usually maintained an attitude of indifference, now seemed uncomfortable. "Teacher, we were just messing around. I swear, we didn't mean to hurt Nicholas. He lowered his gaze, nervously fidgeting with his hands. Messing around? Cynthia repeated incredulously. You call that a joke? Throwing someone's backpack on the floor, humiliating a person to the point where they can't lift their head? Is that what you consider fun? Her firm gaze shifted between Scott and Abigail, who remained silent, seemingly unsure of what to say. After a few seconds, Abigail finally spoke, her voice fragile. We didn't realize we were doing that. We thought he knew it was just a joke. Cynthia sighed, trying to remain calm. That's what worries me the most. You didn't realize. You didn't see the harm you were causing. You were so focused on having fun at someone else's expense that you completely ignored how he felt. Nicholas didn't say anything, didn't react, because you made him believe he didn't have a voice. And that, Scott, Abigail, is unacceptable. Scott shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. But Nicholas never complains, teacher. He never says anything, doesn't even try to defend himself. How were we supposed to know he felt that way? You didn't need him to say anything to know that what you were doing was wrong, Cynthia retorted, looking directly at him. Nicholas's silence was already a response. And now, you're going to have to deal with the consequences of this. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Cynthia emphasizing the importance of respect and empathy, until finally, the students were dismissed, leaving the room in silence, carrying the guilt that now weighed on their shoulders. Later that same day, Scott came home with a frown. Upon entering the living room, he found his father, Michael, sitting on the couch reading the newspaper. Michael was an influential businessman in town, always accustomed to getting what he wanted, and he had a rigid demeanor both in business and at home. Noticing his son enter with an unusual expression, he lowered the newspaper. What happened, Scott? He asked, furrowing his brow. You look terrible. Scott hesitated for a moment, but he knew his father wouldn't accept being left without answers. It was at school. The teacher, the history teacher, Cynthia, yelled at me and Abigail. She said we were bullying a kid in class. She yelled at you? Why? Michael asked, clearly irritated at the idea of someone confronting his son. What did you do? We were just messing around with Nicholas, that kid who never says anything, you know. We teased him a bit, but it was nothing serious. Just a joke. Then the teacher lost it and made us stay after class to lecture us. Scott huffed, crossing his arms. She said we humiliated him, but that's not what happened. I swear, Dad. Michael tossed the newspaper aside, his eyes growing colder as he listened to the story. That's ridiculous, he said, standing up from the couch. A young teacher, who barely started in the profession, thinks she has the right to humiliate my son and treat him like some kind of criminal. No, this is not going to stand. Dad, I don't know if she meant to, Scott tried to argue, but Michael cut him off. She's not going to get away with this, Michael said, already determined. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk to the principal. I know him well, he knows who I am and what I can do for this school. If this teacher doesn't understand her place, I'll make sure she does. The next day, Michael arrived at the school unannounced, determined to resolve the situation. Upon entering the reception, he asked directly to speak with the principal. The secretary, surprised by his unexpected presence, immediately led him to the principal's office. Michael, what a surprise, the principal said, standing up from his chair with a nervous smile as he saw the businessman enter his office. What brings you here? We need to talk, Michael said straightforwardly. About a very concerning situation that happened with my son yesterday. The history teacher, Cynthia, humiliated him in front of the entire class for something she called bullying. Are you aware of this? The principal, visibly uncomfortable, shook his head. I wasn't aware of that, Michael. What exactly happened? Michael crossed his arms and stepped closer to the principal's desk. My son was just messing around with a classmate. Maybe it went a bit too far, but they're teenagers. And this teacher, who, from what I know, just started working here, decided she had the authority to humiliate my son and other students in front of the whole class. She made them stay after class as if they were criminals. The principal sighed, realizing the situation was delicate. I understand your concern, Michael, and of course, we take teacher behavior very seriously. I'll talk to her and find out exactly what happened. I don't think you understand, Principal, Michael said, his voice now colder. This isn't just a matter of having a conversation. This teacher, if she stays here, is going to cause problems. She is disrespecting students like my son, and frankly, I won't accept that my son is treated this way. I believe you don't want problems either, do you? The principal scratched his head, feeling the weight of the pressure. Michael, of course, the last thing we want is a problem. But I need to understand the complete context before making any drastic decisions. I understand that you have to follow protocols, Michael smiled, but his tone was threatening. But let me make one thing clear, if this teacher is not removed, I can guarantee that the investments and support that you and this school receive could change drastically. I don't want to be forced to take such measures, but you know me. I do what it takes to protect my son. The principal hesitated for a moment but was already convinced that he couldn't risk losing Michael's support. Leave it to me, Michael. I'll handle it. The next morning, Cynthia was called to the principal's office. She entered with a slight nervousness, unsure of what awaited her, but as soon as she saw the principal's serious expression, her heart sank. He invited her to sit down, and without beating around the bush, began to speak. Cynthia, we have a serious problem involving you and some students, specifically the son of one of the most influential parents at our school, the principal said, avoiding direct eye contact. Cynthia frowned. I'm aware of the incident yesterday, but I thought I was doing the right thing by intervening. What happened was a bullying situation. I couldn't just stand by. The principal sighed deeply, shuffling the papers in front of him as if searching for the right words. I understand your position, but the pressure on me is immense right now. Scott's father, Michael, is demanding action. And, honestly, we have no choice. We're going to have to terminate your contract. Cynthia was momentarily speechless, processing what she had just heard. You're firing me? For standing up for a student who was being humiliated? The principal looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Cynthia, I don't have another option. I can't risk the support we have. I'm really sorry. But you need to understand that this isn't just about you, it's about the institution as a whole. With tears in her eyes, Cynthia slowly got up, still in disbelief at what was happening. This is an injustice. I was trying to do what was right. But it seems that, in this school, what's right is whatever the influential parents decide. Without waiting for a response, Cynthia left the room, her head spinning. She knew she had done the right thing, but power and influence had spoken louder. That same day, she packed her things and went to say goodbye to her students. When she entered the classroom, the students were sitting in silence. Some had already heard rumors about her dismissal. Nicholas, in particular, looked downcast, not understanding why his teacher, who had tried to defend him, was leaving. Guys, Cynthia began, her voice firm but laden with sadness, today is my last day here. I wish the circumstances were different, but I have to go. You've all been amazing, and I hope you continue to be. Remember one thing, never let anyone take away your voice. Stand up for each other, always. The students remained silent, some with tears in their eyes, others unsure of what to say. As Cynthia gathered her things and left the room, she felt a mix of sadness and helplessness, but also a deep conviction that she had done the right thing. After Cynthia left the school, Nicholas came home quieter and more dejected than usual. His mind was filled with thoughts about what had happened that day. He knew that Cynthia's dismissal was directly linked to what had occurred in the classroom, and the weight of guilt consumed him. Upon entering the house, his father, Charles, was in the living room reading some reports. Charles was a powerful man, holding a prominent position in the government and responsible for various educational projects. When he saw his son enter with that gloomy expression, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. "Nicholas, what happened? Is everything okay?" Charles asked, getting up from the couch and walking towards his son. Nicholas hesitated for a moment, but he knew he could no longer keep everything to himself. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Dad, I need to tell you something that happened at school today." Charles furrowed his brow and gestured for Nicholas to sit down. "Tell me, son. What's going on?" "Today, Miss Cynthia, the history teacher, got fired," Nicholas began, his voice hesitant. "And I think it was because of me." Charles looked at him in surprise. "How do you mean, because of you? Why was she fired?" Nicholas lowered his head, visibly uncomfortable. "Some classmates, they always tease me, make jokes, humiliate me. I never told you because I didn't want to worry you. I know how busy you are with all the work you do in education, and I didn't want to be a burden." He paused, his voice faltering. "They went too far yesterday, and Miss Cynthia intervened. She stood up for me, but I heard some rumors that one of the boys' fathers, Scott, used his influence to pressure the principal, and she ended up getting fired." Charles felt the blood rush to his head. He looked at his son with a mix of sadness and anger but kept his composure. "You're telling me you're being bullied at school and never told me because you didn't want to bother me?" Nicholas nodded slowly. "Yes, Dad. I knew you had a lot of responsibilities, and I thought I could handle it on my own. But, now everything has spiraled out of control. I didn't want the teacher to be punished for something she did to protect me." Charles took a deep breath, trying to process the information. "Nicholas, you should never, ever feel like a burden to me. Nothing, absolutely nothing, is more important to me than your well-being. And the fact that this happened right under my nose and that a teacher was fired for doing what was right, standing up for you, fills me with outrage." He stood up, his eyes flashing with anger. "This isn't going to stand. I'm going to fix this right now. If they think they can use their influence to intimidate and manipulate, they don't know who they're dealing with." Nicholas remained silent, watching his father. Charles was known for being a powerful man in the education sector, and Nicholas knew that when he said he would fix something, it was best for people to be prepared. Charles left the house with firm steps and decided that his first stop would be Michael's house, knowing he was Scott's father. He knew Michael was an influential businessman, but in government, no one had more clout in education than Charles. When he arrived at Michael's impressive home, he didn't bother to announce himself. He knocked hard on the door, and when Michael appeared, it was clear he wasn't expecting this visit. "Charles, what a surprise," Michael said, smiling nervously. "What brings you here at this hour? We need to talk." "Now," Charles said, entering without waiting for an invitation. Michael stepped back slightly, sensing Charles's serious and furious tone. Of course. "Please, have a seat," Michael said, trying to maintain his composure. But Charles didn't sit down. He stood there, staring at Michael with a cold glare. "You used your influence to get a teacher fired for protecting my son, and you think this is going to go unnoticed?" Charles began, his voice firm and threatening. "Are you aware of who my son is, Michael? Or did you act thoughtlessly, thinking you could mess with anyone without consequences?" Michael went pale upon hearing the words, "my son." He stammered, trying to explain himself. "Charles, I didn't know it was your son. If I had known it was Nicholas, I would never have done anything. I thought it was just a trivial situation, a misunderstanding. I swear I didn't know." Charles took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "You thought you could intimidate a young, inexperienced teacher, thinking no one would defend her. You thought you could manipulate the school principal because you have money and local influence. But let me tell you something, Michael, in the field of education, I am the authority here. And I won't accept this kind of abuse. Cynthia did nothing but protect my son from the cruelty of other students, including yours. Michael was now completely submissive, sweating and clearly nervous. Charles, please, I didn't know. Forgive me. I didn't want this to escalate. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I never meant to offend you or your son. It's not about me, Michael, Charles said, his voice steady. It's about justice. You used your power to harm someone who was doing the right thing. Now, you're going to stay quiet and let me handle this. I've already dealt with you, and I hope you've learned your lesson. Next time, think before you act. Michael nodded, still dazed. Yes, yes. It's all clear. I apologize again, Charles. Charles didn't wait for more apologies. He turned and left, leaving Michael with the feeling that he had narrowly escaped something much worse. From there, Charles headed straight to the school. When he arrived, he asked to see the principal immediately. The secretary, noticing the serious tone in his voice, hurried to announce his arrival. The principal, already aware of Charles's influence, looked visibly nervous when he entered the room. Charles, I didn't expect a visit from you. What can I do for you? The principal asked, trying to hide his nervousness. Charles wasted no time on pleasantries. I came here to talk about the firing of Cynthia, the history teacher. The principal swallowed hard. Yes, I'm very sorry, but there was a lot of pressure from one of the students' parents, and I had no choice. Scott's father, he was very clear about the consequences if I didn't take action. Charles crossed his arms and looked directly into the principal's eyes. Let me be very clear with you. Not only did you fire a teacher for doing what was right, but you also let yourself be manipulated by a man who was simply trying to protect his son from facing the consequences of his own actions. The principal tried to interject, but Charles interrupted him. You are the principal of this school. Your responsibility is to ensure the integrity, fairness, and education of your students, not to cave into the pressure of influential parents. And if you don't resolve this now, I can guarantee that your career won't last much longer. I can ruin your future in education with a single phone call. If this all leaks out, you know who will pay the price, right? The principal went pale. I understand, Charles. What do you want me to do? You will rehire Cynthia immediately. And I don't want to hear anything more about outside pressures. I've already dealt with Michael. You will ensure that the teacher gets the respect she deserves, and that nothing like this happens again. The principal nodded quickly, realizing he had no other choice. Of course. I'll contact her immediately. The firing will be reversed. Charles paused, then added in a threatening tone, and I'll give you a piece of advice, if anything like this leaks or happens again, I will personally make sure you never work in education again. Is that clear? The principal shook his head rapidly, almost stammering. Yes, it's clear. I'll do whatever it takes. Charles gave the principal one last look and left the room, leaving the man visibly shaken. A few days later, Cynthia received the news that her firing had been reversed. She was rehired, and upon returning to school, she was warmly welcomed by her students. The respect for her had grown, and many now saw her strength and courage in a new light. The principal, unable to withstand the pressure and embarrassment caused by the incident, eventually resigned shortly after, citing personal reasons. A new administration was appointed, and the school implemented stricter policies against bullying and undue parental influence. Cynthia returned to her classes, feeling stronger than ever. She knew she had gone through a tough test, but in the end, justice had prevailed. And, above all, Nicholas now knew he would always have someone by his side, both his teacher and his father, who was willing to fight for him and for a fair educational system. The atmosphere at the school changed, and Cynthia's case became an example that truth and integrity sometimes triumph over even the most powerful. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.